Hello, everyone, friends, family, and neighbors. Much as we'd prefer to be in the village and see one another tonight, it's wonderful to think of you scattered across the beautiful hills and valleys of Cornwall. I'm Ann Coffin, trustee of the library, and I'm happy to be welcoming you to our second annual Cornwall Reads Cornwall. We're grateful for your presence, for the wonderful community that has brought us all together, and in particular, thinking about today's event, for the talented people that have been drawn to Cornwall historically and into the present, an entertaining sampling of whom you will hear from in a moment. We're thrilled to welcome back Roxana Robinson and Blair Brown, and to welcome for the first time Andersen and Anne Kreamer, newly arrived in our town. They will be introduced by the inimitable Ted Schillinger, famous nationally as a producer, writer, and director, whose films have appeared on Netflix, PBS, and in theaters near you. Ted's family has been coming to Cornwall since 1942, and in his words, and I quote directly, "That's another way of saying that for 80 years they have been behaving themselves impeccably at the dump for fear of incurring the wrath of the gods and losing their recycling privileges." This afternoon, as our master of ceremonies, Ted promises to behave himself and keep order as we move through our program. Before the fun begins, we want to thank the town of Cornwall and the people of Cornwall who have helped us navigate this very challenging year with contributions of time, talent, energy, and financial assistance. It is our privilege and pleasure to be part of this community and to have been able to create the Zoom programming that has entertained and enlightened us all free of charge through these difficult months. We hope that those of you who feel so inspired will find your way to the Donate Now button on our website, www.cornwalllibrary.org, and help us to keep these programs going into 2021. Thank you, one and all, and on with the show. Ted?
Thank you, Anne. I just want to say it's so exciting to be part of this event, and I'm so grateful to be included. When Anne reached out to me to explain the event in the first place, she said it was going to feature some of Cornwall's greatest wits. And I thought, okay. And then she said that those are going to be actually writers from the past, but their passages will be read by the leading lights of Cornwall's cultural and literary scene today. And I thought, okay. And then she said, we'd also like you to participate. So we continued to talk about it. It turned out she'd heard I hosted another event in Cornwall, where I not only got a couple of decent laughs, but my hosting had led to no litigation whatsoever, which is a major concern for the library's legal defense fund. And I said, hey, whoa, no litigation yet. So what really sucked me in was this idea of trying to do humor and comedy on a Zoom webinar, where you can't see or hear your audience. So no matter how well you do, you won't know. You could be crushing it and you would have no idea. The whole thing is just like bombing. And what humorist could resist that? So throughout my notes here, I have written pause for laughter. And I'll be pausing, but if you ain't laughing, I don't know, do some push-ups or something. I'm a big believer in exalting humor because humor is, of course, the definitive human skill. Of course, it amuses and distracts, but it also deflates our pomposity, and at its best, it alleviates suffering. And so is a kind of extraordinary generosity. So I took the gig and began negotiating my fee. I negotiated for about 15 seconds before learning there was no fee, but given the circumstances, I convinced the managers of the event that I needed something. And that is why this may be the only event in which I will ever be described as famous nationally. Thank you for that, Anne, and thank you, Kara. What I really am is I'm that guy in the Vermeer gallery at the Metropolitan Museum who, when you walk in, is holding forth in a pompous voice and a high nasal tone to his friends about the Dutch Renaissance. The truth is, the guy knows a little bit about Vermeer, and if you listen, you'll learn a thing or two. But the truth is, you're just waiting for him to shut up and get to the point so that you can sit quietly with Woman with a Lute. So in that spirit, let's talk a little more seriously about the subject at hand. Cornwall's long and robust relationship with the written word. As every school child knows, Cornwall was first settled in the year 1913 by a nomadic tribe of Dutch warrior poets known as the Clan Van Doren. an ancient people governed by an elite cadre of appallingly talented authors, critics, and essayists who, launching from their network of beautifully furnished subterranean ateliers deep under Cream Hill, seized control of American letters for about 60 years. The next great turning point of Cornwall's literary story comes 8 years later, with the founding of the Yelping Hill colony in 1921. Prior to that time, and this is true, prior to that time, Yelping Hill had a rather different reputation. It had made nationwide headlines as the rural getaway of one Swami Abhedananda, a rogue Vedanta guru whose gripping career arc is proof that the charismatic men who ran mystical sects in 1920 got into pretty much the same trouble they get into in 2020, and for exactly the same reasons. For all you Hindi speakers out there, hashtag man bihi. Also, if you have a lot of patience and nimble archive skills, I strongly recommend paging through the 1918 New York State Supreme Court filings in the matter of William Boley versus Harriet Boley. It's a great read, and you don't even have to read between the lines to get the fun stuff. Spoiler alert, Harriet ends up on Staten Island. But I digress. After the Swami moved on, the Yelping Hill community was built in 1921 by Ruth Maxon Adams, one of America's pioneering woman architects. And it's often been speculated that its kitchenless homes, its communal meals, and its community childcare system were an expression of early feminist ideals. In fact, Yelping Hill was an early experiment into a sadly forgotten social movement, the WASP Kibbutz, established by the radical Zionists who ran Vassar College and the Book of the Month Club. This experiment was abandoned after 3 unsuccessful years of cultivating date palms along Town Street, and Yelping Hill reinvented itself as a writer's colony. And so at last, Cornwall finally shrugged off its shady hippie past of disreputable painters and visual artists and settled into a century of highly prestigious writers, editors, teachers, and poets. Over the next decades, an impressive roll call from Maurice Sendak to Louis Gannett to James Thurber to the aforementioned flying squadrons of Van Dorens would shower the publishing world with piquant observations and mordant wit, much of it heavily colored with the pines, sugar maples, evening light, and wildlife in whose thrall most of us here at this event still pass our days. Which brings us to our first reading. Few figures in Cornwall's humorous past loom quite as large as James Thurber. Even today, he holds a towering position as a wry, unblinking observer of the American condition. The Thurber home still stands at the top of Essex Hill, or as it is really known, the gateway to East Cornwall. Thurber famously disliked being viewed as a satirist, which is a shame because when you're incredibly good at something, you may as well take a bow for it. And that is as good a segue as I can imagine into our readers tonight. We will be hearing 2 Thurber excerpts tonight. The first will be read by Roxana Robinson. Roxana is an incredibly accomplished novelist, biographer, critic, New Yorker writer, and gardener. Roxana is also the granddaughter of Samuel Scoville Jr., who is coincidentally the author of a reading that will come later in the program. She will be reading The Dog That Bit People. Roxana?
Thank you, Ted. I'm glad to hear this version of Cornwall being sent out over the airwaves. So I will tell you a little bit about this piece. My family knew James Thurber very well. Not that we had ever met him, we hadn't, although we knew that he lived very tantalizingly near us in Cornwall. But we knew his work, we had all his books, we'd read all his stories, we had pored over his cartoons, we knew all his aunts and uncles, we all quoted from our favorite passages. And at times my father would read Thurber out loud. We 5 children looked forward to this because invariably, while he read, my father would become overtaken by mirth. He would begin to choke and then to snort, and he would be unable to continue. The same thing would happen to my mother, although when she laughed, she made no sound. She simply shook. All this was thrilling to us children because our parents ran the world. My father was not only the head of our family, he was the head of our school. So it was wonderful for us to see them like this, utterly helpless, incapacitated, as we were too, under the manic spell of James Thurber. This is in memory of my parents, Peter and Alice Barry, The Dog That Bit People. Probably no one man should have as many dogs in his life as I have had, but there was more pleasure than distress in them for me, except in the case of an Airedale named Muggs. He gave me more trouble than all the other 45 or 46 put together. Although my moment of keenest embarrassment was the time a Scotch terrier named Jeannie, who had just had 6 puppies in the clothes closet of a 4th floor apartment in New York, had the unexpected 7th and last at the corner of 11th Street and 5th Avenue during a walk she had insisted on taking. But the Airedale, as I said, was the worst of all my dogs. He really wasn't my dog, as a matter of fact. I came home from a vacation one summer to find that my brother Roy had bought him while I was away. A big, burly, choleric dog. He always acted as if he thought I wasn't one of the family. There was a slight advantage in being one of the family, for he didn't bite the family as often as he bit strangers. Still, in the years that we had him, he bit everyone but Mother, and he made a pass at her once, but missed. That was during the month when we suddenly had mice, and Muggs refused to do anything about them. Nobody ever had mice exactly the way we had mice that month. They acted like pet mice, almost like mice someone had trained. They were so friendly that one night, when Mother entertained at dinner the Frioliras, a club she and my father had belonged to for 20 years, she put down a lot of little dishes with food in them on the pantry floor, so that the mice would be satisfied with that and wouldn't come into the dining room. Muggs stayed out in the pantry with the mice, lying on the floor, growling to himself, not at the mice, but about all the people in the next room that he would have liked to get at. Mother slipped out into the pantry once to see how everything was going. Everything was going fine. It made her so mad to see Muggs lying there, oblivious of the mice, they came running up to her, that she slapped him and he slashed at her, but he didn't make it. He was sorry immediately, Mother said. He was always sorry, she said, after he bit someone, but we could not understand how she figured this out. He didn't act sorry. Mother used to send a box of candy every Christmas to the people the Airedale bit. The list finally contained 40 or 50 names. Nobody could understand why we didn't get rid of the dog. I didn't understand it very well myself, but we didn't get rid of him. I think that 1 or 2 people tried to poison Muggs. He acted poisoned once in a while. And old Major Moberly fired at him once with his service revolver near the Seneca Hotel in East Broad Street. But Muggs lived to be almost 11 years old. And even when he could hardly get around, he bit a congressman who called to see my father on business. My mother had never liked the congressman. She said the signs of his horoscope showed he couldn't be trusted. He was Saturn with the moon in Virgo. But she sent him a box of candy that Christmas. He sent it right back, probably because he suspected it was trick candy. Mother persuaded herself it was all for the best that the dog had bitten him, even though my father lost an important business association because of it. I wouldn't be associated with such a man, Mother said. Muggs could read him like a book. We used to take turns feeding Muggs to be on his good side, but that didn't always work. He was never in a very good humor, even after a meal. Nobody knew exactly what was the matter with him, but whatever it was, it made him irascible, especially in the mornings. Roy never felt very well in the mornings either, especially before breakfast. And once, when he came downstairs and found that Muggs had moodily chewed up the morning paper, he hit him in the face with a grapefruit and then jumped up on the dining room table, scattering dishes and silverware and spilling the coffee. Muggs's first free leap carried him all the way across the table and into a brass fire screen in front of the gas grate. But he was back on his feet in a moment, and in the end, he got Roy and gave him a pretty vicious bite in the leg. Then he was all over it. He never bit anyone more than once at a time. Mother always mentioned that as an argument in his favor. She said he had a quick temper, but that he didn't hold a grudge. She was forever defending him. I think she liked him because he wasn't well. He's not strong, she would say pityingly. But that was inaccurate. He may not have been well, but he was terribly strong. One time my mother went to the Chittenden Hotel to call on a woman mental healer who was lecturing in Columbus on the subject of harmonious vibrations. She wanted to find out if it was possible to get harmonious vibrations into a dog. He's a large tan-colored Airedale, my mother explained. The woman said that she had never treated a dog, but that she advised my mother to hold the thought that he did not bite, and he would not bite. Mother was holding the thought the very next morning when Muggs got the Iceman, but she blamed that slip-up on the Iceman. If you didn't think he would bite you, he wouldn't, Mother told him. He stomped out of the house in a terrible jangle of vibrations. One morning when Muggs bit me slightly, more or less in passing, I reached down and grabbed his short stumpy tail and hoisted him into the air. It was a foolhardy thing to do, and the last time I saw my mother, about 6 months ago, she said she didn't know what possessed me. I don't either, except that I was pretty mad. As long as I held the dog off the floor by his tail, he couldn't get at me, but he twisted and jerked so, snarling all the time, that I realized I couldn't hold him that way very long. I carried him to the kitchen and flung him onto the floor and shut the door on him just as he crashed against it. But I forgot about the back stairs. Muggs went up the back stairs and then down the front stairs and had me cornered in the living room. I managed to get up onto the mantelpiece above the fireplace, but it gave way and came down with a tremendous crash, throwing a large marble clock, several vases, and myself heavily to the floor. Muggs was so alarmed by the racket that when I picked myself up, he had disappeared. We couldn't find him anywhere, although we whistled and shouted until old Mrs. Detweiler called after dinner that night. Muggs had bitten her once in the leg, and she came into the living room only after we assured her that Muggs had run away. She had just seated herself when, with a great growling and scratching of claws, Muggs emerged from under the Davenport where he had been quietly hiding all the time and bit her again. Mother examined the bite and put arnica on it and told Mrs. Detweiler that it was only a bruise. He just bumped you, she said. But Mrs. Detweiler left the house in a nasty state of mind. Lots of people reported our Airedale to the police, but my father held a municipal office at the time and was on friendly terms with the police. Even so, the cops had been out a couple of times, once when Muggs bit Mrs. Rufus Sturtevant, and again when he bit Lieutenant Governor Malloy. But Mother told them it hadn't been Muggs's fault, but the fault of the people who were bitten. When he starts for them, they scream, she explained, and that excites him. The cop suggested that it would be a good idea to tie the dog up, but Mother said it mortified him to be tied up and that he wouldn't eat when he was tied up. Muggs at his meals was an unusual sight because of the fact that if you reached toward the floor, he would bite you. We usually put his food plate on top of an old kitchen table with a bench alongside the table. Muggs would stand on the bench and eat. I remember that my mother's Uncle Horatio, who boasted that he was the third man up Missionary Ridge, was splutteringly indignant when he found out that we fed the dog on a table because we were afraid to put his plate on the floor. He said he wasn't afraid of any dog that ever lived and that he would put the dog's plate on the floor if we would give it to him. Roy said that if an Uncle Horatio had fed Muggs on the ground just before the battle, he would have been the first man up Missionary Ridge. Uncle Horatio was furious. Bring him in now, he shouted. I'll feed the thing on the floor. Roy was all for giving him a chance, but my father wouldn't hear of it. He said that Muggs had already been fed. I'll feed him again, bawled Uncle Horatio. We had quite a time quieting him. In his last years, Muggs used to spend practically all of his time outdoors. He didn't like to stay in the house for some reason or other. Perhaps it held too many unpleasant memories for him. Anyway, it was hard to get him to come in, and as a result, the garbage man, the ice man, and the laundry man wouldn't come near the house. We had to haul the garbage down to the corner, take the laundry out and bring it back, and meet the ice man a block from home. After this had gone on for some time, we hit on an ingenious arrangement for getting the dog in the house so that we could lock him up while the gas meter was being read and so on. Muggs was afraid of only one thing, an electrical storm. Thunder and lightning frightened him out of his senses. I think he thought a storm had broken the day the mantelpiece fell. He would rush into the house and hide under a bed or in a clothes closet. So we fixed up a thunder machine out of a long, narrow piece of sheet iron with a wooden handle on one end. Mother would shake this vigorously when she wanted to get Muggs into the house. It made an excellent imitation of thunder, but I suppose it was the most roundabout system for running a household that was ever devised. It took a lot out of Mother. A few months before Muggs died, he got to seeing things. He would rise slowly from the floor, growling low, and stalk, stiff-legged and menacing, toward nothing at all. Sometimes the thing would be just a little to the right or the left of a visitor. Once a Fuller Brush salesman got hysterics. Muggs came wandering into the room like Hamlet, following his father's ghost. His eyes were fixed on a spot just to the left of the Fuller Brush man, who stood it until Muggs was about 3 slow, creeping paces away. Then he shouted. Muggs wavered on past him into the hallway, grumbling to himself, but the Fuller man went on shouting. I think Mother had to throw a pan of cold water on him before he stopped. That was the way she used to stop us boys when we got into fights. Muggs died quite suddenly one night. Mother wanted to bury him in the family lot under a marble stone with an inscription such as, "Flights of angels sing thee to thy rest," but we persuaded her it was against the law. In the end, we just put up a smooth board above his grave, along a lonely road. On the board, I wrote with an indelible pencil, "Cave Canem." Mother was quite pleased with the simple classic dignity of the old Latin epigraph. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. I'm going to actually visibly applaud, and I think we can assume that the internet is thundering with applause and cries of appreciation. At least that's what I've been telling myself. So I invite you to join me in my fragile bubble of confidence. When I first chatted about this event with our next reader, she took pains to point out that she was not really a funny person, but rather one of the most earnest people one could meet. And I thought, wow, we should really get somebody else. But that turned out to be impractical. First of all, she's married to our third reader. And second of all, she was lying. She is a funny person and an earnest person and a wonderful reader for this event. Anne Kreamer is an author, a popular columnist, and a gardener. She will be reading from the work of Samuel Scovel Jr., a lawyer, adventurer, and nature writer whose family came to Litchfield County in the 1700s. Samuel Scovel Jr. has the distinction of being Lyman Beecher's great-grandson, Henry Ward Beecher's grandson, and Roxana Robinson's grandfather, which is really a way of saying that if your family came to Cornwall in 1942, you just got here. Anne is going to read from Scovel's Everyday Adventures. Anne?
Thanks, Ted. I appreciate the vote of confidence about my humor capacity too. Anyway, Kurt and I were delighted to be included in tonight's celebration. We feel huge gratitude for being part of this extraordinary community, and I feel like those bonds have deepened over the course of this pandemic. I don't know if many of you have read Mark Helprin's wonderful novel, A Winter's Tale, but Cornwall feels similar to me to the magical lake of the Coheries, a sylvan, unspoiled natural paradise. Roxana recently introduced me to the writing of her grandfather, whom I discovered was a lawyer, ornithologist, and a classic old-fashioned humanist. But most importantly for me in this moment in time, he was a keen naturalist. And it felt like I was meeting a neighbor along the road. The excerpt I'm going to read is from the Snow Stories chapter of his book, Everyday Adventures, published in 1920. And I feel so happy to celebrate its centennial tonight. When I read the book, it resonated so deeply with me, amplifying and mirroring my daily practice of walking Popple Swamp Road. If any of you traverse Popple Swamp with any regularity, I am the crazy woman out there in rain or snow, sleet or shine with the orange baseball cap on. But it was, in my practice of walking Popple Swamp Road, it was finding peace and illumination through observing each changing cloud, each arriving bird, each shoot sprouting. His writing has helped me sharpen my focus on my walks, viewing the flora and fauna of our little patch of Cornwall through the prism of the natural cycles of life. How much has changed, but more importantly, how much is the same 100 years later? The stories of the snow, although often difficult to read, are always interesting. After the winter fairly sets in, we read nothing about the 7 sleepers who put themselves in cold storage until spring. The bear, the raccoon, the woodchuck, the skunk, the chipmunk, and the jumping mouse are all fast asleep underground. The last sleeper never touches the ground when awake and sleeps swinging upside down by the long recurved nails on his hind feet. He is the bat who lives and hunts in the air and can outfly any bird of his own size. Perhaps the most unexpected of the snow stories was one which I read one winter day when out for a walk with the botanist. Although the snow was on the ground, the sky was as blue as in June, as the botanist and I swung into an old road that the forgotten feet of more than 2 centuries had worn deep below its banks. It was opened in 1691 when William and Mary were king and queen, and Boston tea parties and Liberty bells and declarations of independence were not yet even dreamed of in the land. We always keep a bird record of every walk and note down the names of the sky folk whom we meet and any interesting bit of news that they may have for us. In the migration season, there's great rivalry as to who shall meet the greatest number from the crowd of travelers going north. Last year, my best day's record was 84 different kinds of birds, which beat the botanist by 2. A black duck and a late bay-breasted warbler were the cause of his undoing. To a birdist, every walk is full of possibilities. Any day, anywhere, some bird may flash into sight for the first time. Today, however, our walk was an almost birdless one. We heard the caw of the crow, the only bird note that can be certainly counted on for every day of the year. We saw the flutter of the white skirts of the juncos. From a blighted chestnut tree, we saw a bird flash down into the dry grass from his perch on a dead limb. As we came near, he glided off like a little aeroplane, and we recognized the flight and the spotted buff waistcoat of the sparrowhawk hunting meadow mice. Later in the morning, we heard the pip pip of the song sparrow and marked the black spot of his breast. Far ahead, across a snow-covered meadow, a bird flew dippingly up and down. He had laid aside his canary yellow and black suit, but his flight revealed the goldfinch. Passing through the beechwood, we heard a sharp call and saw a black and white bird back down a tree. This cautious procedure stamped him as the downy woodpecker. Of all the tree climbers, only the woodpeckers backed down. Strangely enough, a short distance farther on, we heard another cry like that of the downy woodpecker, only harsher and wilder, and caught a glimpse of the hairy woodpecker, the big brother of the downy, a rare, larger bird of the deep woods. That ended our bird list, a paltry 7 when we should have had a score. Farther on, we crossed a plateau where a series of stumps showed where a grove of chestnut trees had grown in the days before the blight. Suddenly, from under our very feet dashed a brown rabbit, his white powder puff gleaming at every jump. The lithe, lean, springing body seemed the very embodiment of speed. There are few animals that can pass a rabbit in 100 yards, even our cottontail, the slowest of his family. He is, however, only a sprinter. In a long distance event, the fox, the dog, and even the dogged, devilish little weasel can run him down. We looked at the form where he'd been lying. It was a wet little hollow made in the dank grass, with only a few dripping leaves for a mattress. A forlorn bed. Yet Runny Bunny, as some children I know have named him, seems to rest well in his open-air sleeping porch, and even lies abed there. One far-away snowy day in February, 2 of us stole a few moments from the bedside of a sick child. How long, long ago it all seems now, and walked out among the wild folk to forget. In a bleak meadow, right at our feet, we saw a rabbit crouched, nearly covered by the snow. He had been snowed under days before, but had slept out the storm until half of his fleecy coverlet had melted away. He lay so still that at first we thought he was dead, but on looking closely, we could see the quick throbbing of his frightened little heart. There was not a quiver from his taut body, or a blink from his wide open eyes. He lay motionless until my hand stroked gently his wet fur. Then indeed, he exploded like a brown bombshell from the snow, and we laughed and laughed, the first and last time for many a weary week. Years later, I was coasting down the meadow hill with one of my boys, and as the sled came to a stop, a rabbit burst out of the snow, almost between the runners. The astonished boy rolled into a drift as if blown clear off his sled by the force of the explosion. Today, as the brownie sped over the soft snow, we could see how its tracks and series of fours were made. At every jump, the long hind legs thrust themselves far in front. They made the two far apart tracks in the snow, while the close-set forepaws made the nearby tracks. Accordingly, a rabbit is always traveling in the direction of the far apart tracks, quite contrary to what most of us would suppose. It is the same way with celestial rabbits. Look any clear winter night down below the belt of Orion, and you will see a great rabbit track in the sky, the constellation of Lepus, the hare, whose track leads away from the great dog with baleful Sirius gleaming green in his fell jaw.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was wonderful. Folks, if you liked what you heard today, I also suggest his long overlooked masterwork, Scoville's Digest of the Liquor Laws of Pennsylvania from 1700 to 1914. It doesn't sound that funny, but the footnotes on absinthe alone are worth the trouble. Our next reader is Kurt Andersen, whose great claim to fame is that he is Anne Kreamer's husband. Oh, there's more. Apart from that, he's a novelist, a critic, and a commentator, and seems to have hosted public radio's Studio 360 for almost 20 years. And before that, along with his wife Anne and Graydon Carter, he co-founded Spy Magazine, the seminal satire magazine of the 1980s and the 1990s. The founders once described the moment of creating Spy as a time when they were, quote, young enough to not have any bridges to burn and just old enough to know where to put the explosives under the bridges. In other words, it was Mad Magazine for post-pubescence, which is more than enough qualification to participate here tonight. Kurt will also be reading from James Thurber. The reading is The Lady on 142. Kurt?
Thank you. Thank you very much. In addition to, after I started and helped run Spy for a few years, actually, I went to work for the New Yorker. I was a staff writer at the New Yorker, so I felt as though I was following in James Thurber's footsteps, of whom Thurber, that is, I had been a fan for a long, long time, even though, unlike Roxana, I was in no physical proximity growing up in Omaha, Nebraska to Thurber. But I was a fan, and we had many Thurber books as well, including famously his anthology that came out in 1942, in which the story for which he's most famous, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, appeared, and subsequently became a film with Danny Kaye and then a film with Ben Stiller many years later. But I mention all that not just because Walter Mitty is famous as a Thurber creation, but this story I'm going to read, which came out, which he published in the New Yorker in the summer of 1943, just a few years after he published Walter Mitty, and a year after Walter Mitty appeared in that anthology that was in my parents' library. I mention that because they are clearly in this, they occupy the same universe, as you'll see. I want to mention, as a kind of concordance for you younger people, if there are any younger people. Well, I guess there are people who weren't alive in 1943. But explaining a few things. One is that, or reminding people that this is the middle of World War II. It's key to the premise of this story, which is a work of fiction. Harold Ickes was, Harold Ickes anyway, was FDR's New Deal czar. Maltese Falcon movie came out in 1941, mystery, of course. And Big Bill Tilden was an American tennis player who was #1 in the world for many years in the 1960s. So this is called The Lady on 142. The train was 20 minutes late, we found out when we bought our tickets. So we sat down on a bench in the little waiting room of the Cornwall Bridge station. It was too hot outside in the sun. This midsummer Saturday had got off to a sulky start, and now, at 3 in the afternoon, it sat sticky and restive in our laps. There were several others besides Sylvia and myself waiting for the train to get in from Pittsfield. A woman who fanned herself with the Daily News, a young lady in her 20s reading a book, a slender, tanned man sucking dreamily on the stem of an unlighted pipe. In the center of the room, leaning against a high iron radiator, a small girl stared at each of us in turn, her mouth open, as if she had never seen people before. The place had the familiar, pleasant smell of railroad stations in the country, of something compounded of wood and leather and smoke. In the cramped space behind the ticket window, a telegraph instrument clicked intermittently, and once or twice a phone rang, and the station master answered it briefly. I couldn't hear what he said. I was glad on such a day that we were going only so far as Gaylordsville, the third stop down the line, 22 minutes away. The station master had told us that our tickets were the first tickets to Gaylordsville he had ever sold. I was idly pondering this small distinction when a train whistle blew in the distance. We all got to our feet, but the station master came out of his cubbyhole and told us it was not our train, but the 1245 from New York, northbound. Presently, the train thundered in like a hurricane and sighed ponderously to a stop. The station master went out on the platform and came back after a minute or two. The train got heavily underway again for Canaan. I was opening a pack of cigarettes when I heard the station master talking on the phone again. This time, his words came out clearly. He kept repeating one sentence. He was saying, "Conductor Reagan on 142 has the lady the office was asking about." The person on the other end of the line did not appear to get the meaning of the sentence. The station master repeated it and hung up. For some reason, I figured that he did not understand it either. Sylvia's eyes had the lost, reflective look they wear when she's trying to remember in what box she packed the Christmas tree ornaments. The expressions on the faces of the woman with the Daily News, the young lady, and the man with the pipe had not changed. The little staring girl had gone away. Our train was not due for another 5 minutes, and I sat back and began trying to reconstruct the lady on 142. The lady Conductor Reagan had, the lady the office was asking about. I moved nearer to Sylvia and whispered, "See if the trains are numbered in your timetable." She got the timetable out of her handbag and looked at it. 142, she said, is the 1245 from New York. This was the train that had gone by a few minutes earlier. "The woman was taken sick," said Sylvia. "They're probably arranging to have a doctor or her family meet her." The woman with the Daily News looked around at her briefly. The young woman, who had been chewing gum, stopped chewing. The man with the pipe seemed oblivious. I lighted a cigarette and sat thinking. "The woman on 142, I said to Sylvia, finally, might be almost anything, but she definitely is not sick." The only person who did not stare at me was the man with the pipe. Sylvia gave me her temperature-taking look, a cross between anxiety and vexation. Just then, our train whistled and we all stood up. I picked up our 2 bags and Sylvia took the sack of string beans we had picked for the canals. When the train came clanking in, I said in Sylvia's ears, "He'll sit near us. You watch." "Who? Who will?" she said. "The stranger," I told her, "the man with the pipe." Sylvia laughed. "He's not a stranger," she said. "He works for the Breeds." I was certain that he didn't. Women like to place people. Every stranger reminds them of somebody. The man with a pipe was sitting 3 seats in front of us across the aisle when we got settled. I indicated him with a nod of my head. Sylvia took a book out of the top of her overnight bag and opened it. "What's the matter with you?" she demanded. I looked around before replying. A sleepy man and woman sat across from us. Two middle-aged women in the seat in front of us were discussing the severe gripping pain one of them had experienced as the result of an inflamed diverticulum. A slim, dark-eyed young woman sat in the seat behind us. She was alone. "The trouble with women," I began, "is that they explain everything by illness. I have a theory that we would be celebrating the 12th of May or even the 16th of April as Independence Day if Mrs. Jefferson hadn't got the idea her husband had a fever and put him to bed." Sylvia found her place in the book. "We've been through all that before," she said. "Why couldn't the woman on 142 be sick?" That was easy. I told her. "Conductor Reagan," I said, "got off the train at Cornwall Bridge and spoke to the station master. 'I've got the woman the office was asking about,' he said." Sylvia cut in. "He said, 'lady.'" I gave the little laugh that annoys her. "All conductors say 'lady,'" I explained. Now, if a woman had got sick on the train, Reagan would have said, "A woman got sick on my train. Tell the office." What must have happened is that Reagan found, somewhere between Kent and Cornwall Bridge, a woman the office had been looking for. Sylvia didn't close her book, but she looked up. "Maybe she got sick before she got on the train and the office was worried," said Sylvia. She was not giving the problem close attention. "If the office knew she got on the train," I said patiently, "they wouldn't have asked Reagan to let them know if he found her. They would have told him about her when she got on." Sylvia resumed her reading. "Let's stay out of it," she said. "It isn't any of our business." I hunted for my chiclets, but couldn't find them. "It might be everybody's business," I said. "Every patriot's." I know, said Sylvia. "You think she's a spy. Well, I still think she's sick." I ignored that. "Every conductor on the line has been asked to look out for her," I said. "Reagan found her. She won't be met by her family. She'll be met by the FBI." Sylvia said, "Alfred Hitchcock things don't happen on the New York, New Haven, and Hartford." I saw the conductor coming from the other end of the coach. "I'm going to tell the conductor," I said, "that Reagan on 142 has got the woman." "No, you're not," said Sylvia. "You're not going to get us mixed up in this. He probably knows anyway." The conductor, short, stocky, silvery-haired, and silent, took up our tickets. He looked like a kindly Ickes. Sylvia, who had got stiffened, relaxed when I let him go by without a word about the woman on 142. "He looks exactly as if he knew where the Maltese Falcon is hidden, doesn't he?" said Sylvia, with the laugh that annoys me. "Nevertheless," I pointed out, you said a little while ago that he probably knows about the woman on 142. If she's just sick, why should they tell the conductor on this train? I'll rest more easily when I know that they've actually got her." Sylvia kept on reading as if she hadn't heard me. I leaned my head against the back of the seat and closed my eyes. The train was slowing down noisily, and a brakeman was yelling, "Can't, can't," when I felt the small, cold pressure against my shoulder. "Oh," the voice of the woman in the seat behind me said, "I've dropped my copy of Coronet under your seat." She leaned closer, and her voice became low and hard. "Get off here, mister," she said. "We're going to Gaylordsville," I said. "You and your wife are getting off here, mister," she said. I reached for the suitcases on the rack. "What do you want, for heaven's sake?" asked Sylvia. "We're getting off here," I told her. "Are you really crazy?" she demanded. "This is only Kent." "Come on, sister," said the woman's voice. "You take the overnight bag and the beans. You take the big bag, mister." Sylvia was furious. "I knew you'd get us into this," she said to me, shouting about spies at the top of your voice. That made me angry. "You're the one that mentioned spies," I told her. "I didn't." "You kept talking about it and talking about it," said Sylvia. "Come on, get off, the two of you," said the cold, hard voice. We got off. As I helped Sylvia down the steps, I said, "We know too much." "Oh, shut up," she said. We didn't have far to go. A big black limousine waited a few steps away. Behind the wheel sat a heavy-set foreigner with cruel lips and small eyes. He scowled when he saw us. "The boss don't want nobody up there," he said. "It's all right, Carl," said the woman. "Get in," she told us. We climbed into the back seat. She sat between us with the gun in her hand. It was a handsome, jeweled Derringer. "Alice will be waiting for us at Gaylordsville," said Sylvia, "in all this heat." The house was a long, low, rambling building, reached at the end of a poplar-lined drive. "Never mind the bags," said the woman. Sylvia took the string beans and her book, and we got out. 2 huge mastiffs came bounding off the terrace, snarling. "Down, Mata," said the woman. "Down, Pedro." They slunk away, still snarling. Sylvia and I sat side by side on a sofa in a large, handsomely appointed living room. Across from us, in a chair, lounged a tall man with heavily lidded black eyes and long, sensitive fingers. Against the door through which we had entered the room leaned a thin, undersized young man with his hands in the pockets of his coat and a cigarette hanging from his lower lip. He had a drawn, sallow face, and his small, half-closed eyes stared at us incuriously. In a corner of the room, a squat, swarthy man twiddled with the dials of a radio. The woman paced up and down, smoking a cigarette in a long holder. "Well, Gail," said the lounging man in a soft voice, "to what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Gail kept pacing. "They got Sandra," she said finally. The lounging man did not change expression. "Who got Sandra, Gail?" he asked softly. "Reagan on 142, said Gail. The squat, swarthy man jumped to his feet. "All the time Egypt say kill this Reagan," he shouted. "All the time Egypt say bump off this Reagan." The lounging man did not look at him. "Sit down, Egypt," he said quietly. The swarthy man sat down. Gail went on talking. "The punk here shot off his mouth," she said. "He was wise." I looked at the man leaning against the door. "She means you," said Sylvia, and laughed. "The dame was dumb," Gail went on. "She thought the lady on the train was sick." I laughed. "She means you," I said to Sylvia. "The punk was blowing his top all over the train," said Gail. "I had to bring him along." Sylvia, who had the beans on her lap, began breaking and stringing them. "Well, my dear lady," said the lounging man, "a most homely little touch." "Was a touch?" demanded Egypt. "Touch," I told him. Gail sat down in a chair. "Who's going to rub him out?" she said. "Freddie," said the lounging man. Egypt was on his feet again. "Nah, nah," he shouted. "Not a punk. The punk bump off the last 6, 7 people." The lounging man looked at him. Egypt paled and sat down. "I thought you were the punk," said Sylvia. I looked at her coldly. I know where I've seen you before," I said to the lounging man. "It was at Zagreb in 1927. Tilden took you in straight sets, 6 love, 6 love, 6 love." The man's eyes glittered. "I think I bump off this man myself," he said. Freddie walked over and handed the lounging man an automatic. At this moment, the door Freddie had been leaning against burst open, and in rushed the man with the pipe, shouting, "Gail! Gail! Gail!" "Gaylordsville! Gaylordsville!" bawled the brakeman. Sylvia was shaking me by the arm. "Quit moaning," she said. "Everybody's looking at you." I rubbed my forehead with a handkerchief. "Hurry up," said Sylvia. They don't stop here long." I pulled the bags down and we got off. "Have you got the beans?" I asked Sylvia. Alice Cannell was waiting for us. On the way to their home in the car, Sylvia began to tell Alice about the woman on 142. I didn't say anything. "He thought she was a spy," said Sylvia. They both laughed. "She probably got sick on the train," said Alice. "They were probably arranging for a doctor to meet her at the station." "That's just what I told him," said Sylvia. I lighted a cigarette. "The lady on 142, I said firmly, "was definitely not sick." "Oh, Lord," said Sylvia. "Here we go again." The end.
That was great. Thank you very much, Kurt. Oh, and before I forget, Kurt, quick thing. I pitched a couple stories to Spy in April 1987, and I haven't heard back. I assume they're sort of figuring it out, but let's just connect and you just put a bee in your bonnet, just something to get back to.
Will do.
In that and figure it out. Our final reader today is Blair Brown. Blair is an award-winning star of stage and screen, an erstwhile Cornwall resident, and now neighbor, having relocated to the seersucker-clad hills of Sharon. She is presently working closely with a dialogue coach mastering the local dialect, the Buckley Lockjaw. I'm told that when she's finally mastered that, she will be granted full Sharon citizenship. Maybe. Blair's career is long and impressive, and it seems that she has found a way to defeat every grim challenge thrown up against women actors in Hollywood. I'll just add that you won't see it on her IMDb profile, but probably her greatest achievement as a younger actor was in blowing my freaking mind in the Ioka Theater in 1980, watching her performance in Altered States. Never mind Roger Ebert, it took me about 2 years of therapy to figure that movie out, but Blair was worth every penny. Blair will be reading from the exquisite prose of the novelist and food writer Laurie Colwin, a Cornwall summer resident. The selected piece is about Thanksgiving. Blair?
Hi, thank you. This is not a virtual blush, this is an actual blush, right? Erstwhile, I don't like that word, right? Hi, Laurie Colwin. Laurie is the reason I first heard about Cornwall. We were neighbors in New York. We had just moved, my partner and I had just had a baby, and we rustled some money together from television and bought a little place in Chelsea, which then was a very, very dicey neighborhood. I was walking down the street one day and there was a woman sitting on the stoop of this house, Jersey, and that Jersey that was in the back of the New Yorker, that's what was it, fisherman's Jersey. And she said, "So how's your new apartment?" It was like, good. She said, "I'd like to see it." I said, well, sure. Meaning we would one day. And she came down the stairs and followed me home. On the way, she said, "Oh, hi, I'm Laurie Colwin." I thought, God, I love your books. I couldn't say anything. It can't be, because why would you be sitting on a stoop? Anyway, Laurie sat on the stoop all the time. She was the kind of concierge of the neighborhood. She actually turned our street into a village. And then her focus shifted to a real village somewhere near Massachusetts. I didn't know. She kept talking about this thing. One day she came back with a blue ribbon that she had won at the Ag Fair. What was that? I did not know. Ag Fair for her chutney. This was far better than a National Book Award. And that's how I knew about Cornwall. Laurie died way too young. She had much, much more to do, more books to write, more things to cook, a child to raise, friends to look after. I love reading her stories. This will be back in the library. This will be back in the library on Tuesday. Follow these recipes. The columns she wrote for Gourmet were wonderful, beautiful prose, and then something to eat, nothing better. I'm dedicating this today to RK. It's wonderful to read her mother's work. Turkey angst. There are times when I'm led to believe that I'm the only person in the United States who truly likes the taste of turkey. Plain old roast turkey that the next day provides plain old turkey sandwiches to be spread with Russian dressing. So many other people seem to dread turkey. The highest expression of this loathing can be found under turkey remains and how to inter them with numerous scarce recipes in the nonsense and stray phrases section of the posthumous collection of F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings titled The Crack-Up. Quote, "This is one of the most useful recipes," he writes, "for though not chic, it tells us what to do with turkey after the holiday and how to extract the most value from it. Take the remnants, or if they have been consumed, take the various plates on which the turkey or its parts have rested and stew them for 2 hours in milk of magnesia. Stuff with mothballs. This is the sort of thing that gives turkey a bad name. In my opinion, the poor turkey is a mere scapegoat for the mire of conflicted feelings flooding our psyches at holiday time. It is hard to divorce the turkey from the expectations of the family table, the sibling rivalries, the unspoken resentments, the secret rages that occur even in the happiest families. Add to this the exhaustion of travel or the exhaustion of preparing to welcome traveling relatives, and even the juiciest, tenderest turkey may be as sawdust. Of course, it is possible in the most harmonious family to produce a turkey that may as well be sawdust, just as it is also possible to produce a magnificent turkey in the middle of a family psychodrama. Either way you slice it, it may be easier to blame the turkey. But what about the turkey? If only because people get it fed to them at least once, if not twice a year. My mother believes that a small tom turkey is the best turkey, and that instead of increasing the size of your bird, you should increase the number of them to feed a large party. 8 pounds is about tops in her opinion. To this, I would add that if you can get your hands on a real, for sure, free-range organic turkey, the size almost does not matter. It will be the best turkey you ever had. Now, as to roasting, some people feel that 20 minutes a pound is fine, but I prefer half an hour in a slower oven. I want my turkey to be tender and juicy. The name of the game is constant basting, a boring but necessary chore. I dust my bird with paprika, put it in at a 450-degree Fahrenheit oven for half an hour. Then I cover it with a foil hat and lower the heat to 325. Meanwhile, on the back burner is a pot containing chicken stock, turkey giblets, and any other turkey parts lying around, plus 1 onion and a large clove of smashed garlic. A nicer person would throw in the neck, but I am not a nicer person. And I roast the neck, which I then eat all by myself in the kitchen without a trace of guilt, because I did all the work. Turkey does not need a speck of salt. And if you have basted constantly, you certainly do not need any fat either. The extra stock will make a heavenly gravy. If there is any left over, you can put it in your soup pot or in the fridge, where it will harden into a delicious jelly that can be eaten by a spoon by people like me who like this sort of thing. Of course, the plain fact about turkey is that no matter how many people sit at your table, you will have leftovers. And after a while, people are sick of turkey sandwiches. Furthermore, lots of people really hate turkey soup. Many years ago, I was served turkey tetrazzini, which I vowed I would never, never, never eat again. If your family hates turkey soup, you can make a rich turkey stock and turn it into juk, a Chinese rice gruel. To this rich turkey stock, you add a couple of handfuls of rice, cook it down into a savory mess, to which you add some chopped turkey. When sprinkled with scallions, drizzled with soy sauce, and spiked with a dash of dark sesame oil, this concoction makes you realize how nice life can be. And it is nourishing too. I myself look forward to turning the last bits of turkey into turkey salad. This story, you see, is instructive. This is things that we can be doing now in our own homes later tonight. I myself look forward to turning the last bits of turkey into turkey salad. Dice up your leftovers and toss them in a bowl with a little olive oil, salt and pepper, and a dash of lemon juice. Some people like a shake of Tabasco too. Spoonful of capers, some chopped up cornichon and minced scallion are admirable additions. You can make up your own mayonnaise or add lemon juice to your favorite bottle variety, then mix it into the turkey. You need not feel greedy if this turkey salad is consumed entirely by you. A person who bastes a turkey all day long on behalf of other people's pleasure deserves it. This person is a saint, and if she or he has finished off all the nicest turkey bits plus the last of the capers, tough darts. Turkey roasting's heroes deserve rewards. Some years ago, the turkey producers of this country got together to figure out how to lure Americans into consuming turkey at times other than Thanksgiving and Christmas. They came up with the idea of selling turkey breasts because they're less cumbersome than the whole bird, less labor intensive to cook and easier to store, and also because so many people prefer white meat. I have cooked a couple of these, and while they certainly will feed a number of people, something apart from the rest of the turkey is missing. There is a je ne sais quoi about turkey cooking. The air of festivity, the family squabbles, the constant basting, that does not apply to turkey breast, which is really just a convenience food. You barely have to baste it, and you don't get any of those nice parts like the Pope's nose or the neck to keep for yourself. It is turkey devoid of drama. The highs and lows of dark and white meat, the legs to fight over, the carcass to pick over. And there you have it. Although turkey is delicious in itself, it is burdened with context, as they say in the literary criticism racket. A turkey without seasonal angst is like a baseball game without the national anthem, a winter without snow, a birthday party without candles. For better and worse, The exhaustion, the exhilaration, the expectations, and the complications are a kind of emotional condiment, the secret elements that gives turkey its essential spirit. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you,
Enjoy
Blair.
your leftovers. Enjoy your leftovers.
And Blair's wonderful reading concludes the content of program for tonight, except for a few last thoughts and notes. We all know that Cornwall is an extraordinary place and filled with extraordinary people. And the way we know this is we all tell each other this all the time. But it is really an event like this that reminds me how lucky I am and how lucky we all are to be part of Cornwall's rich universe. And I especially want to thank the stars of the evening, our wonderful readers, Roxana Robinson, and Kreamer, Andersen, and Blair Brown. I'm also proud to bring to your attention your fellow townspeople. Are we technically bringing them to their attention here? Who have worked with unbelievable dedication and diligence to bring you this event. Let's have a round of raucous, utterly invisible applause for Ann Coffin and Karen Beatty and Casey Cook. Let's hope these folks are all turning up, and Nora Horan, Kara Weigold, and my personal guardian angel through this entire process, Carla Herman Landy. I'm sure hundreds are applauding somewhere. When this call is finally over, I plan on racing over to the nearest next tab of my browser and making a donation to the library, and I hope you will too. I encourage it. I want to cheerfully remind you that books do not grow on trees. No, wait a second, books do grow on trees, but events like this do not. And if you'd like to support more events like this, please donate to the library. It's a great way to do it. And please send a message of feedback if you have any thoughts on this event or on future events. Speaking of which, it has been my very great honor to be allowed to be your irreverent host today. And if you want to skip the email to the library and go right to the litigation, my attorneys are Rebus Page Jump LLC in Manhattan, and they are very, very nice people. Thank you for coming. Have a wonderful holiday season and stay safe. Good night.